And we're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brigit panel. We're going to be here today talking about all sorts of things with the goddess and with our connection to her and the books we've written. Probably best to start with the introductions. So, hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Daimler. I wrote a book called Pagan Portals, Brigid, many years ago now. Actually a little sad about how long ago I wrote it, but here we are. And that's why I'm here. And next we have...
On my screen, you just pointed to both of us. So I'll go next.
I did.
Yeah, you have a book to show off. You do it.
I have a book to show off. I almost said I'm Morgan Daimler. That is not true. No, I'm Spartacus. Yeah. I'm Mael Brigde.
We're all Spartacus.
That's right. And this is my book on Brigit. It's a lot of devotional poetry and whatnot, and a Shoppers Drug Mart receipt. Yeah, and it will be out at the end of August. And Erin is...
I am Erin
creeping
Aurelia.
away.
This is my book, which is a journal I write in because my book is not published yet. I am writing a book called The Torch of Brigit, and it is about my reimagined and inspired flame tending practice, in which flame tending becomes a daily meditation for inner transformation. And I'm very excited that Moon Books will be publishing it, and I'm very excited to be here on this Brigit panel with this illustrious company, and I'm really excited to get going in our presentations. That's what I have to show off.
It's beautiful.
Wish I made it, but at least I get to write in it. So we have some questions that we're each going to go through now that we've all given our introductions. Excuse me. We're going to talk about how we each relate with Brigit, what she means to us, what motivated us to write our books, and what kinds of resources we would recommend to anyone who is also interested in Brigit. So we're going to each take turns answering some questions. Our first question today is, which elements, stories, or associations of Brigit do you find most meaningful in your own life? Morgan, take it away.
Oh, that's such a fun question, too. For myself, I think the story that I sort of resonate the most with is her story from the Kahmoy Torah, particularly with the loss of her son. Even though it's a really sad story, and I know not everyone likes the sad stories, but it's just one of those moments that I think, we as human beings can really connect to and relate to and understand that idea of losing someone that you love, that you care about. This is the story which tells us that Brigid was the one who was the first person to keen or, sort of mournfully cry in Ireland. And that's something, again, I think that is very relatable. And I haven't, thankfully, ever been in that exact situation, but I've definitely lost people that I cared deeply about and was very close to. So for me, that's the story when I read it that I feel like I have the strongest connection to with her, and can definitely relate the most to in my own life. So I realize that is a sad way to start off the panel. I feel like I should apologize for that now.
But don't apologize for any feelings. No.
Yeah, and the associations with Brigid that I find the most meaningful. I'm a very big fan of Brig Ambu, Brigid the Cowless, and she's sort of the one who's most associated with sort of justice for people that don't normally get justice. And that would be a really long discussion. I don't want to take too much time away from everyone else, but if you don't know who she is, look into her because she's awesome. And definitely my favorite of the various Brigids.
Do you want to spell her name?
Brig, and the I sometimes has a fada, a little accent mark. And then the second part, Ambu, Ambue, literally means cowless in Older Irish.
Thanks, Morgan. How about you, Mel?
Gosh, I think it depends on the day, really, because there are so many different elements, stories, and associations that I do really resonate with. And in fact, when I first became acquainted with Brigit, I think I was just planning on hanging out for a while, getting to know her, and then moving on to the next deity. And I never moved on, because there's just endless things to connect with and explore and everything. So I mean, that's the true answer, but it's also kind of vague. So I will tell you that today I have been, or the last couple of days, I've been thinking of, it's not really a story, but in Liorgola Erin, I think there's they talk about her as being associated with 4 kings of different, I guess, domestic animals, but these are the kings. And for me, that links her to the sovereignty goddess as well, because I mean, why would just an ordinary person be walking around with these mythic kings? So I see that as her, part of her aspect as a sovereignty goddess, and nothing is happening except that there's, I just have in my mind this image of the oxen, the boar, and the ram, and her. I see them kind of on a hilltop with this wild sky above them, and their demonic voices, which of course that's a Christian way of describing what those spirits or beings or whatever are, but as Morgan so rightly points out, the words for them they're the same words that describe Brigit's keening in Kahmatura, right? So the voice is a really important aspect for me, both in the poetic aspect of the goddess, but also just in my own life. And I was thinking when you were talking, Morgan, that we don't get to express that fathomless, bottomless sorrow aloud almost ever. Mm-hmm. Even when someone has died, we feel like we have to keep it zipped. And yet that is so completely unnatural. And there she is. There they are. There those voices are in all their mightiness. That's really huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would say for myself that it is her association with fire that captures me the most. When I first learned about Brigit and I first learned about flame tending, I came across this little poem online called The Threefold Fire of Brigit. And I've been on a hunt lately to figure out where it came from. And I've searched everywhere incessantly and can find no specific derivation for it. But it reads, fire in the forge that shapes and tempers, fire in the cauldron that nourishes and heals, fire in the head that incites and inspires. And that sets me on fire right there. That sense of her as fire and what that does, it essentially fire transforms. That is what Brigit the Smith, these are 3 sisters, Brigit the Smith, transforms the ore into the weapons and the tools and the ceremonial jewelry and beautiful pieces that adorn and sustain culture, that Brigit the poet transforms all of these concepts and ideas and conglomerates what culture is and what it means and how it is fundamentally meaningful, how we are meaningful in our world, how our world around us is meaningful to us, how we're contextualized within it, and that spiritual relationship inside it. And then Brigit, the healer, transmuting the plants growing from the land with the heat of the hearth, boiling the water of the cauldron, transforming them, releasing their components into medicine to heal our bodies. But that even that there are poetic aspects beyond these things. These are things that are transformation. But what else do these fires do? The healer, when we're healed inside, we are transformed, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally and spiritually. When we create, we are just, I mean, it's imbus, right? You don't know where it is. You don't know where it comes from. It's just like pulling magic out of the air, and all of a sudden something is there. It's magic. It's the magic that everybody gets to do in some way, shape, or form. But when that fire is a part of it, then there's that divine aspect that feeds it and empowers it. And this is what I find in the practice of flame tending that is so meaningful, is that I feel that I am tending her flame, and not only tending her flame, but tending my own flame. And there is a connection between these flames. There is a relationship between these flames, and that her flame transforms me. And that's part of the magic of her fire. So that is what I resonate with most. Which leads us into our next question. How do you best connect with Brigit? With you, Morgan?
I mean, following up on what was just said, I definitely think that I feel like I connect best with her, and I'm sure this is not going to be an uncommon answer on this panel, with fire and with flames and with candles. I tend to do more with candles with her, just because that's what works the best in my household. I was lucky enough the first time I was in Ireland to visit both the site of the church where the flame tending for her occurs, and also 2 of her holy wells. And so I will add in a little with the fire and the candles that I do find her wells and water to be a strong connection for me with her as well. The idea of healing wells and healing water. I had a very profound experience at, if you've ever been to Ireland on a Brigid related matter, there's many, many wells that are sacred wells of Brigid, not just 1 or 2, there's lots. When I was in Kildare, we went to 2. One is the more popular, the one that has the statue, kind of more well known. And there's also what they call the older well, the old Brigid well. When I was at that one, I had a very profound and moving experience where you can kind of walk a circle where this well is, and people tie rags to the plants that grow on the side of the well. And I was standing sort of in the middle of where this all was. And my middle child has health issues, and just sort of asked her, for whatever help she could or would give, anything that could, potentially assist, make my child's life a little easier. And right as I had finished, everything got extremely quiet. And then this group of crows, hooded crows, flew over. They don't have an explicit connection to her, to be clear, but it was just a very moving, significant moment for me. And I felt very strongly like she was listening. So I wanted to add that little watery connection in there. But yeah, definitely candles as well. So
thanks, Morgan. How about you, Mel?
Well, again, many ways. I tend the flame, and I've been doing that for almost 30 years, and with a lot of other people, and so that's a really powerful thing for me. But I also just talk to her a lot. I talk to her a lot, and I write poems to her. Like, I never set out to write this book. I just wrote so many poems, it seemed silly not to have one. And the poems aren't just like petitions or prayers. I was exploring everything I could about her by reading reams and reams of stuff. And so things kept giving me ideas, and I'd be like, I want to explore that one tiny little thing in one tiny little tale. I want to look at that more carefully. And so this poem would come out. And so it's a big way that I can just completely focus on her. Like I'm not thinking about my life or anything else. I'm just completely focused on her. And that's a really powerful thing for me. But I'm also learning more about her and getting closer and closer to her in that way. So yeah, I think poetry, the voice, I guess, is probably the way that I most connect with her.
I love that as a poet myself. And that was one of the things I wanted to touch on, as well as thing that I spoke to a little bit already, but that recalling in Cormac's glossary that she's primarily having been described as a divine poet who was a patron of the poets. And so I love that sense of a goddess who is a poet who speaks the language of poetry, which is the language of the numinous, the things that we cannot just say with simple prosaic words that don't make sense because they're ineffable, they're beyond human mind and comprehension. But in poetry, we can encapsulate all of these concepts into a whole other kind of lexicon. And she is a representation of that, of how we communicate in that way, to speak to the cosmic and the universal, but also how it finds itself in the specific and the particular of our own bodies, in our own lives, in our own communities. So I love being a poet who gets to have a relationship with a deity who is a poet. Mm-hmm. That means a lot to me. And I feel like we kind of share a vibe in that way as well, like we speak the same language. So that's really cool for me. And I feel like that comes through in my flame tending as well. I think that when I sit and meditate with her, which is primarily what I do when I am flame tending, I have developed kind of a guided meditation that sort of brings me into that head space and that heart space and that spirit space. And then from there, it's just open and free form and communication, just listening and receiving and asking questions. And just being in that space with her that is only created by that act of flame tending is how it feels. It's like the act of flame tending, of lighting the candle and saying the prayer and leaving the offering, sort of erects its own kind of temple space that then becomes an invitation for her to step into, and I am there waiting, and then I am receiving what she brings after she's received what I've brought, and it's this very sacred kind of spiritual communion. And so I'm really grateful for the flame tending practice, to have discovered it, and to Mel, who runs Daughters of the Flame, which has been a wonderful spiritual home for me to be a part of. I did run my own flame tending order for a while until life became such that I more. So I'm very grateful to Mel for having a space that I could go to and feel that sense of belonging without having to carry everything with me that I had been, because flame tending practice means a lot to me. I'm glad to have that in my life, for sure.
Can I say one more thing about the poetry?
No, Mel.
Okay.
Yes, please.
That'll be good. I just wanted to say that I wasn't a poet until I wrote this book, which that sort of makes you think, ew, it's not going to be very good poetry, but trust me, I worked on it.
It's good poetry.
It's good. We've read her. We will vouch.
Okay. But I was a writer, and I thought about writing a nonfiction book about her. I just felt a huge compulsion or desire to write something about her as this offering. A novel I would have had to choose to narrow down her aspects in way too strictly, because you can't have a novel where the one character is completely different in every scene. It would have been too constraining. And so I felt like I was forced, in a way, the only way I could really write about her in the way that I needed to write about her was to write poetry. And so in a way, she has made me into a poet.
That's fabulous. I love that. And that leads us right into our next question, Mel. Why did you write your book? So as long as you're on a roll, just keep going.
Okay. Well, I think I've kind of already answered it.
I know. I was thinking you mostly covered it, but if there's any more, here's your opening.
Well, it started, I had written a couple of poems about her, one or two, over the many years I'd known her, but then I got cancer, and all of a sudden I was writing like petitions and you're like, please help me, and it very quickly morphed into this other stuff. So I think, I don't know what it was about that experience, which was extremely terrifying, but in other ways it opened up a different vision on life and a different community, where I have ever since then have spent time with other cancer survivors, or people who were going through it at the time, and people who died. And, so cancer and death have become a much more understandable partner in life to me. And I don't know what it was about that, but that pushed me into opening to her much more.
I think that makes perfect sense. As a poet, knowing that what we read from the Cauldron of Poesy, that heart center, once that opens up with all of those emotions, and going through what you went through stirred up so many emotions, that all of that then just channels straight up through us, and it came out in the way that you expressed it. So I think that makes great sense.
Definitely.
Morgan, how about you? Tell us about your motivation for writing your book.
So I wrote Pagan Portals, Brigid, back in 2015. I probably wrote it in 2014. It was published in 2015. And at the time, there really wasn't too much that was on the market, particularly for a pagan audience, that was aimed at Brigid. There were a couple books, but they weren't really beginner books necessarily. They were fairly thick. They had a lot going on in them. And the two that I can think of offhand that were out that were more pagan oriented were very specific to the sort of approach that author had, which is what most authors do. And I don't mean that as a criticism, just, an observation. And I wanted to put something out for people that were interested in Brigid or felt drawn to her, that was a little more neutral, that wasn't, advocating for a specific religious or spiritual approach, if you will, and that really kind of would serve as a strong introduction. There's also so much misinformation out there in general about everything, to be honest, but, particularly the Irish gods tend to get some really wacky things going around about them. And so I wanted to offer something that was a good introduction, that was fairly straightforward, and that also looked as much as possible at the primary source material, which is something, again, that not at the time in particular, not a lot of books were doing. It was a lot more personal gnosis and a lot more inspired material, which again isn't, a criticism is not a bad thing, but there really wasn't anything out there that was looking at, where does she appear in the original mythology, and I just wanted to try to put something out that would sort of fill that gap and be a good introduction that people could then take and go further and go to these other books and these other sources, and kind of have an idea of some of the basic things. So that was my motivation.
Perfect. We all have to have somewhere to start, right?
It's such a goddess send, that book, and I actually made it required reading for one of the courses that I teach about her, because it's just such a good place to start.
So now it's a
then I served my purpose.
exactly. Bring knowledge to the world, because we all need to know where to start if we want to find out about something, and then you receive inspiration from there. But what's the starting point? Right. Because seriously, what you've put in your book is what I spent like 10 years researching about everything I could find about Brigit, about all the Irish cities, about Irish tradition, and finding out, well, which books are you supposed to read that have this stuff in, and they're old arcane books. And then you have to weed out, well, which ones are actually talking about what actually happened versus which books are talking about things that developed later down the line and had something more to do with other traditions. And, it's a lot to sort out. So the fact that you put it all in one place really is a time saver. It's great.
Oh yeah. And there is so much confusion written about her that I still find it useful to go to your book to get clear where things come from, who originated this story, and not, well, if it's a more modern one, I have to discard it. I may still want to work with it, but at least I really need to know where things are coming from. So that's really
just
great.
Know that source. Yeah. Awesome. That's
it's
good
not something we grew up with to inherently know, and we're trying to learn and sort it all out. So absolutely. As to my book, it is one of those inspired ones you were referring to. So I do. Thank you. I appreciate that. Seems to be what happens. I don't really know what happened. I don't know. One day I just sort of started having all these kind of thoughts rolling around in my brain. And I really enjoyed flame tending so much. And I thought this is such a nice meditation practice. And most meditation practices are daily, right? So I'm kind of sad I only get to do this every 20 days. But hey, I could do it every day if I wanted, right? There's nothing stopping me, right? So why don't I? So I said, okay. So I just did. And then through doing it, and this is really what it is. It isn't that I came up with this whole big thing. It's just that I sort of, and this is what I've learned about Brigit, the way she guides. I called my book The Torch of Brigde because really she's sort of shining this light and we just follow along. And the ways that she shines it, she's in front of us, but you can only see like 1 or 2 steps in front of you at a time. You don't get to see the whole thing. So you just take the 1 or 2 steps you can see. And then when you get there, you get to see 1 or 2 more. So that's how we go along. We just go step by step. So I started just lighting a candle to her and meditating with her daily. And then through that, I just began to receive more and more. And I don't know if these are my thoughts or these are my ideas. I shared all of this that I'm putting together into this book with a friend of mine. And she said, I think you're just channeling straight from Brigit, Erin. I said, oh, well, I don't know. I guess it could be. I don't know. It's like Imbus. It just comes out of the air. We don't know. We don't know where it comes from. But we're really glad it's there.
Hazelnuts.
Yes. I haven't been chewing any of those lately, so I can't attribute it to that.
Sorry.
No magic hazelnuts in my house right now. But one of the ideas that came to me in whatever way that it did was, there's 20 days or nights flame tending cycle. And there's 20 trees in the tree ogham. Isn't that interesting? Then it's kind of like the chocolate and peanut butter thing. What if I put them together? And so I did, and I began receiving even more guidance into how these things can work together to create not just a daily practice, but one that is also fundamentally encapsulating all these cycles of flame tending. So it's not just a matter of doing the same thing every day, but that each cycle has its own particular flavor depending on what it is that calls to us at that particular moment. And that these can even be translated more broadly into, the faces of Brigit being represented within the seasons themselves and the whole annual turning. There are whole resonances here, which is where the whole poetic aspect comes in that I love so much about the whole. There's these whole cosmic themes that can come down and be very specific, and very specific experiences that can then have cosmic references. And all of these things can weave in and tie together and give us a sense of meaning of how we situate ourselves in our world, and how we situate our relationships with Brigit, and how that relationship feeds us, and how we can then in turn feed the world from how we've been fed. So that's what I hope to share in my book, and why I ended up putting it together. So our last question that we have to go through right now is, what is one piece of advice you would give someone new to Brigit? What do you think, Morgan?
So, so many pieces of advice that are worth
I know,
giving to new
but you
people.
can only have one, Morgan. Set
So-
down the pieces.
I don't want to make assumptions about what either of you are going to advise, but I will be true to brand here. And my piece of advice is find good translations when you're looking at the stories of her in the original mythology, which I do recommend people kind of start with her older stories and sort of see where her root is and her base is, and then, move forward from that, which is not at all surprising advice if anyone has talked to me for more than 30 seconds ever. But a lot of the translations that are out there are super sketchy. So you want to find one that's good, and that you can trust. So that's my best piece of advice for people just starting out, is find sources you can trust, in the original mythology.
That makes sense. We all have to start with the basic grammar and build up from there. So that is an excellent point. Thank you. What do you think, Mel?
Well, this may be controversial, but
Do it.
my and it's related to what you said, but my big thing these days seem to be give to the goddess what is the goddess's, and give to the saint what is the saint. And we've mostly talked about the goddess stories, but almost everything we know about Brigit comes from the saints' lives and people's traditions about her, wells, things like that. But people conflate them and then say that she is a goddess of springtime, or a goddess of, springs or whatever. And I think it's really fine to do that, to mush them together, if that is the way you best can understand her and work with her and everything. But for me, I think it really makes a lot of sense to learn first where these things come from, and then decide. Because I started off as a complete smusher, because that was the only thing I knew. That's not a technical term.
It could be. It could be.
I'm glad you specified.
But that meant that later on, as I started learning other things, I found myself doing some painful reevaluation. So I letting go of something, an idea that was core for me around Brigit, was really hard. So I advise people to start off by finding these things out, and then decide how you want to approach her. I now see the saint and the goddess. Well, they're not even unified. All the saint stories are not really all congruent, if you know what I mean. And same with the goddess stories. But at least I see where they come from, and in some ways I relate to them differently. And in some ways it's made my practice more specific. So when I want to ask for a certain thing, I'll say Brigit healer, and for me that's tricky, because both the saint and the goddess have healing aspects, but
Who's going to show up?
Exactly. And I don't somehow think there are completely many Brigits, but I know there might be, and that I maybe am talking to all of them through one idea a lot of the time. So it's enriched things for me. And I say, go read all the saints' tales, read whatever you can about what Irish people have, what practices they've maintained for long times, because some of the things we know about the saint come from the people, like tending the holy wells, and some of them come from the monastics, like her lives. And they're not exactly the same, but they're very rich together. So I say, if you possibly can, read Alice Curtain's Brigit of Ireland, read Rita Minahan's Rekindling the Flame.
Yes.
Read Morgan Daimler's book.
Yes.
Read Morgan Daimler's book about the Dagda, because he's her dad. And they work really well together. Read Sean Arduin's. And then
that's my favorite.
There are two more to find out more about what was really going on with St. Brigid. I'm having a hard time handling to it once, but anyway, I'll put these titles in the notes afterwards. Even they're hard to get a hold of, most of those books, but your library is there for you. Interlibrary loans. If you can't buy the book, that's okay. Borrow it. That is my advice.
I love that we managed to get half an hour into this panel before we hit the most controversial topic when it comes to Brigid, which is the goddess the same as the saint, or are they separate persons? Like, people will get into actual fights about this. So awesome.
Yeah, I love both of your answers. I think, again, as I mentioned before, beginning with the grammar is that you kind of have to know what ground zero is before you build up from there. And so definitely finding reputable sources to learn about Brigid the goddess, and also, as Mel said, Brigid the saint, because the whole tradition of flame tending as we know it comes out of the Christian tradition there in Ireland. So it's very important to have a grounding in that knowledge as well. And I think additionally to that, as you were saying with some of the other books you were pointing out, Mel, that getting a greater understanding of the Irish tradition itself, I think, is also very helpful to understand how Brigid is contextualized in there, to understand how the tradition itself imbues its world and its people with meaning, and how they draw that relationship between the people and the world. I think that helps to understand Brigid's role and place within that, and then the people's place within that, and then to understand how we relate. I think the relationship is really important. And that's what I love about flame tending, is it's that place where you just sit and build that relationship. And so the other piece of advice I would give is just light a candle and meditate with her. Is that is something you can do. Definitely go find out the grammar, go find out the grounding, because that's just your foundational, that's fundamental, that's like where everybody needs to begin. But the other half of the relationship is opening up and communing itself, is finding out the information, and then also opening up to the imbus of whatever it is that's going to come, whatever it is that she wants to bring you, whatever it is that she wants to show you. Ask her something and see what she says, and pay attention to how she communicates with you. It's different with everyone. You may see images, you may hear sounds, you may receive words, you may have feelings. You don't know what it is until you find out. And that's why her light only shows us 1 or 2 steps at a time, because that's about all we can take in and try to figure out at one time. So first figure out how it is she communicates with you and how it feels to communicate with her. And then from there, you can build on it. Find out the basic information about her, and from there, you can build on it. A solid foundation. It's always the best place to start. That's
Definitely.
So we finished up with the questions we had in mind. If we want to, we could take a little bit more time to unpack that thought of Brigid the goddess versus or Brigid the saint, since, as you pointed out, Morgan, it's kind of a piece in the Brigid community, and we didn't really plan any space for it here in this, but we could. Oh, Mel's like, oh, no. You have all used the term tend the flame. Can you explain what you mean exactly by that? What are you all talking about? That is an excellent question. Again, goes back to foundation. And that is something I go into my book as well. Because I want my book to be accessible to anybody who picks it up. And so I spend time introducing Brigit and talking about who she is as the goddess, and then also Brigit the saint and who she is, and then also the practice of flame tending that came out of the tradition of Brigit the saint. Brigit is said to be a woman who lived in Ireland, who then created a co-ed Christian community. She wanted to be a woman of God, and she did so. And then within that community, a tradition was developed. Some say maybe it was an older tradition that was pre-existing, but there is nothing yet extant that proves that is the case. So it is all conjecture at this point on that level. But the tradition is that there was a perpetual fire in a fire temple, and this fire did not need to be constantly fed with fuel. It burned on its own. And it was tended each day and night for a 24-hour period by one of the nuns who were part of her community at Kildare. And then, and maybe Mel will have some corrections for me on this, because I'm trying to remember back to the history of it. I believe Brigit herself was part of that practice, but then what happened was after she died, the practice continued. And so it was said that 19 nuns tended it on 19 nights, and on the 20th night, they said to her, Brigit, it's your night. Keep your flame. And so her spirit was said to be there to tend the flame during that night. And from there, the practice had gone in and out through history. The flame had been extinguished by the Protestant church that no longer wanted to have the Catholic churches alive. And then it was resurrected as a practice by our Mael Brigde here, as one of the ladies who brought the practice back, and also women in Ireland who resurrected the practice in 1993, I believe. And so it's been around again since then, except we don't have in-person experiences so much anymore. So it's largely gone online so that women and other people everywhere can, welcome back, can tend the flame together, in which we each set up our own personal spaces and light a candle in our own personal spaces dedicated to Brigit, and then have the responsibility of minding that flame for as much as we can during that 24-hour period. And then it becomes someone else's turn to do so in their own space. And then how we use that time is kind of individual. I don't think there's any dictated one way to do it. So the book I'm writing suggests one way to approach it. And I'll let Mel talk some more about that, since she actually operates a flame tending order.
Yes.
See the flame.
Yeah. Actually, I found out that Lady Olivia's group had their own little cell of flame keepers before the day that the Brigidian sisters and I relit the flames. So we were relighting it. Yeah. Just found
I want to
out
know
recently.
more about this. I don't know if I know enough. I know about
You do, but
Temple of Isis.
but we don't have a lot of time left. So
Tell me where to go.
Yes, I didn't start the timer right away, and I'm already at 41 minutes. So we probably only have like maybe 2 minutes left or something. So I'll just say I did write an essay about this thing. There's controversy. I don't actually think it started with St. Brigid. I think it was a later medieval tradition that was given historicity as things are to make them seem more important. But it is important. It's really important, especially now. So that's all I'll say.
Great.
Well, it's first mentioned in the 12th century, I think. Gerald of Wales.
Of Wales, right. He talked about
Gerald.
Not just first, but only. He's the only one who ever wrote about it. So
that's true. That's all we have to go on.
And he also thought that goose barnacles, well, never mind.
Gerald
had
had
a
some
lot of
interesting
creative
opinions.
What's
Interesting
that?
opinions.
It did.
He had some interesting opinions.
He had opinions about the Irish in general.
he
So
did.
He was not
so we
fond
kind
of
of
the
have to take him
Irish.
with exactly. So we kind of have to take him with a grain of salt, and yet it is all we have to go on. So we do what we can with what we've got, I guess.
I'll
Until
just
more
say
field.
there were several, at least 7 other monasteries at that time that were tending a perpetual flame, and they were all male monastics. So I think it was much more, to do with the community and that sort of thing. But anyway, we do it our way.
It's definitely a valid modern practice. It's been around now for a while. So
become established.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I will never stop because, like you say, Erin, it just brings so much into my life that why would I?
I know. It feeds us.
Yeah, it doesn't. The origin stories that faiths have are often not. They're more symbolic, let's say, than they are historical.
No.
I know. But
I'm shocked.
But the thing is, people, like you say, people do fight about this so much in our tradition today. People fight about whether it really happened or not. And my point is, it doesn't matter if it
At
really
this
happened
point, it
or
doesn't.
not.
Right.
It
does now.
It informs us now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes,
definitely.
it has become reestablished.
Thank you, Trevor.
And there's Trevor. Thank you, Trevor, for putting this together and giving a chance to.
Yes.
Share
Thanks to everyone
together.
behind the scenes at MoonCon 21. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
My
Thank you very much.
fellow panelists. It was so good to get to do this with you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's our cue. So
Bye.
I will say goodbye and good night to everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.